Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Kia ora. How's it going, Peter? And welcome into everyone to the Hoon on the Kaka. Great to see you.
It's going okay, thank you. I've been doing quite a bit of work, as I think of it, this week. I've actually been doing some editing and some writing, which you'll start to see coming out in the little near future, I hope. I've done that piece on violent or confrontational, if you like, political discourse in New Zealand, which will hopefully come out soon, unless they spike it, because I interview some pretty spicy people. So yeah, no, today, of course, being the teachers' strike, I ended up looking after or spending time with a young friend of mine who's 5, who's a good mate of mine and a cousin, and so I had a very entertaining day today with an amusing 5-year-old. It involved ice cream, pain chocolat, possibly hot chocolate for one, and a cappuccino for me. And it was very nice. And a walk, which you will appreciate, a walk along the beach at Hoon Bay to find beach glass.
Oh, beach glass. It's the best stuff.
Yeah. Have you got a little, I know you've got quite a good vat because everybody should know that one of the last times I saw Bernard was with his headphones on, and he basically ghosted me because I interrupted him as he was walking up Palm Beach looking for, and it was such a beautiful spiritual thing almost for a slightly introverted person like Bernard to do this. But what I found today, Bernard, and I imagine this doesn't happen in Waiheke so much, was that on Hamilton Road Beach, the child, my friend, did find several good pieces of amber and white glass.
Oh, really? Wow.
But we also found lots and lots of glass that was too sharp and too broken and had obviously just been sort of thrown relatively recently. So while I love it, I'm also suspicious about where it comes from. And so I did do a bit of a cleanup on the beach. And I think I told you, Bernard, maybe told the other guests, I went out once, or 3 times now, I think, with the sea cleaners people who go out around the Hauraki Gulf and clean bits of plastic and stuff.
Yeah.
And they're amazing. But what it means is that you become like a gannet for rubbish. There isn't a bloody cigarette butt or a certainly not a blue ring from a milk bottle that you can leave behind anymore.
No, this is great. Yeah, I do admit being a pretty SB focused glass collector, and every piece of glass is different, and every beach is different,
Absolutely.
and it's the most lovely thing.
It is, and I loved watching it because the last time I was at your house, which is quite a long time ago, your collection had become quite a decent sized jar.
Yeah, no, it'll become a building material source at some point, and I'm enjoying it. So,
but Bernard, you could do one of those walls at your place. I mean, certainly we could at my place, which would be a bit dangerous. Remember that people used to build cement walls out of their wine bottles and beer bottles?
Oh, yeah. I got a feeling Lynn would love that.
Yeah, an alcoholic stream.
Yeah. So, no, we're having a lot of fun at the moment. I'm a bit surprised you didn't go on the march with your cousin because...
No, I absolutely... Well, I'm not a marcher. I don't... My other cousin, who is the teacher, Luke, who was on... my cousin, he's my nephew, who was on the march, went today, told me he was horse, but he spelt it Horse. So being a primary school teacher, I was a little bit nervous that he didn't call it Hoarse. But maybe we expect too much of them. But he's out there, and good on them. But I'm not a joiner for that kind of thing, Bernard. I've already been told off by my daughter and to some extent by my girlfriend for not going on the Palestinian marches. But it's just not what I do because I've been a journalist for too long.
Yes, I mean, I like going to watch, and we will at the end of the show, and if not in the show notes, put up some of the most hilarious signs.
Oh, are they? Good.
I'm really enjoying protests at the moment, watching protests, because there's a real attempt to make them fun. I remember watching marches decades ago that were quite dire and dour, 2 4 6 8 what is it we appreciate? You know,
Yeah.
but
Well, there's
but
that one, and there's the weird American one. Hey, hey, ho, ho,
oh yeah,
blah, de,
yeah.
blah, de, blah, and it's just always bollocks. I didn't go to participate, but I did go with friends to watch theoretically the pink march, the women march against Trump at the first in Washington when I was living there, and that was pretty amazing. The scale of it, the wittiness of the statements, and of course, remember people were knitting little pink hats with little cat's ears.
Oh yeah.
To which I can't remember whether they were pink cat's ears or meant to be a sort of vagina related thing. But anyway, let's not go there. I mean, we can all go there, but let's not go
Yeah.
absolutely there.
So
And Bernard, we're going to do. Shall we say what's on the show today? Because
yes,
I
we've
think
got
we're going to have a guest coming up soon.
Yes, we've got a cracking lineup. Starting off with Jessica Pelleray, who is the Executive Director of Lawyers for Climate Action. Unfortunately, Catherine can't make it this week, but Jessica's jumped in, and we'll talk about not just the methane decision from last week, but also decisions to sharply reduce the amount of climate reporting by New Zealand companies. We'll talk about that. Then we'll have Robert on to talk about geopolitics.
Do you mean when you say Robert, you mean Bobby? You mean
Robert
Professor
Patman?
Robert Patman,
Exactly.
the Professor of International Affairs? Yeah.
Yes, and then we've got a special guest on, Chris Finlayson, the former Treaty Relations Minister, who has just come back from the funeral today of Jim Bolger. And he wrote an excellent obituary of Jim Bolger in the New Zealand Herald. We'll talk about that. And also what's happening with the foreshore and seabed legislation.
I'm so glad we've got Chris Finlayson, because I know he's an odd character for some people and so on. My ex-stepmother-in-law is in his former electorate in Eastbourne and tells me things about him. But I think she probably did vote for him, swallowed her Labour instincts, and may well have voted for him. But I find him incredibly interesting, and I wish we'd had him on many times before, because he so embodies that kind of national MP, relatively conservative MP, who kind of got with the program and understood why it was important to do these arrangements with Maori. And I want to talk to him a lot about the unwinding of it. So we might have to push Simon to let us go on an extra 15 minutes or half an hour or so.
Yes, I'm certainly looking forward to it. He is one of the more thoughtful, surprising and well-read, deeply connected former ministers that we've got, and in many ways, a lot like Jim Bolger was. And then we speak to Sarah Dalton, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists. This is the Junior Doctors Union. They, of course, have had a massive day today with over 100,000 people marching in what's called the mega strike, despite the awful weather. And she'll come and talk about the negotiations with the government for the young doctors, what's going on there, what might happen next. It's really been the event of the day.
And we should talk about the political combination, because it was interesting that both Simeon Brown and Judith Collins took them to task on that. Let me just mention a media story before you bring in Jessica. People might have seen Metro magazine would appear to have had its last gasp. It may not. It's owned by a really interesting Japanese billionaire family that is the same family that owns Naoshima Art Island that people will know about in Japan. And he's the scion of that, has moved to New Zealand, and he has a mission to buy 100 New Zealand companies that do good. And Metro was one of the things he's bought, but they've still got somebody there who's got a very good magazine background working as on a part-time basis. And they say they're going to run it with guest editors. But I just wanted to say something about this, because I suspect it may go. I'm going to have a word to them, see if I can help in any way. But when I see something like that shut after North and South, and then I see the screeds of criticism about media, it does make you worried about what will come. I mean, media deserves some criticism in New Zealand, a lot of criticism, and we sometimes make it, particularly around context. But just remember what's going to happen when there's this absence. The politicians will fill the void.
Well, actually, an enormous amount of bots from Russia and China will fill the void.
That's right. Well, let's go for Jessica now. Thank you.
Thank you. No, you're right. Jessica Pelleray, the Executive Director of the Lawyers for Climate Action, thank you so much for coming on to the Hoon again.
Kia ora, very happy to be here.
Great.
Thanks, Jessica.
What did you think, Jessica, of the government's announcements this week to severely wind back the number of companies and investment funds who have to provide climate disclosures through the stock market and publicly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really disappointing decision. It actually goes far beyond what MB even consulted on earlier this year. So they consulted on increasing the threshold to 500 mil in terms of the size of entities, and that's now up to 1 bill. And what it means is that it's more than halved the number of entities covered by the regime, something the government is celebrating, but I don't think is something that we should celebrate at all. I think it's short-sighted. It's not an evidence-based decision in the slightest. And really, it's just the latest in this string of cuts and rollbacks to climate law and regulation in New Zealand. It feels a bit like...
David Seymour says it's liberating New Zealand business to compete and, throwing off the shackles of unwanted international law.
Well, I would say it feels a bit more like death by 1,000 cuts to climate policy rather than throwing off the shackles. And I mean, the thing on climate disclosures, and we can talk about this more, New Zealand actually led the world. We introduced the first climate-related disclosures regime globally, after which many jurisdictions followed, most recently Australia, but the EU, we've got the UK, I think Singapore, lots of countries in APEC. So all these countries follow us, and now we have the very dubious nod of being the first country in the world to weaken a climate-related disclosures regime just 2 years into its adoption. Just disappointing.
I wonder what companies think of this, because many of the companies providing this climate disclosure are part of international companies. They're subject to reporting requirements by other regulators, banking regulators in Australia, or central banking and insurance regulators in Europe. They've got funds who invest in them that are international funds, which themselves have their own disclosure regimes. And my impression of the sort of, the big end of town, the international capital flows, is that most of those people are on board and are concerned about, where their money goes and being able to trace where it goes and what it's used for. And when they don't get this disclosure, they can't do this. I wonder, where is the big end of town in Aotearoa and the rest of the world? Where are they jumping up and saying, hey, stop this. We don't want you to do this.
Well, it's interesting. It's 70 to 80%. This is what the latest research says. 70 to 80% of our exports by value go to jurisdictions that have or are about to introduce a climate-related disclosures regime. And I mean, I think the question of what is the big end of town, what are companies saying about this, is a really good one, because we don't know. Something that I think is really concerning about this change is the lack of evidence behind it. We actually don't know, and we don't have a robust study, don't know if the government ever commissioned or got one of these, a study that actually shows this is how the climate-related disclosures regime was working in practice. These are ways in which it could be improved. If you read the press statement that the minister released, he talks about like anecdotal evidence. I've heard from some companies that they've spent X million dollars or X $1,000s on these reporting requirements, and cost benefit is completely skewed. That's anecdotal. And we see this in our submissions. A number of other people did as well. If you're going to say that climate-related disclosures are a disincentive for listing on the NZX, you should have evidence for that. If you're going to then cut those disclosure requirements, you should provide evidence. 2, you should also provide evidence for any contention that the cost benefit isn't working and that these are costing companies far too much money. I think this lack of evidence and just throwing the baby out with the bathwater is not good enough.
Particularly when many companies who are trading with, they're selling stuff into Europe, they're selling stuff into the UK, they're buying stuff from Europe and the UK. A lot of companies and customers now want to know the provenance of the things they are buying, and they want to know what the carbon footprint is. And if you as a company don't understand how to do that, and you don't have systems in place...
Clean and green New Zealand, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Well, who cares about that?
No, but I agree, Bernard, but we could be, this was a selling point, as Jessica said, this was something we were proud of at one point.
and we are trashing it. I heard the phrase vandalism used by David Parker actually before the election, talking about what the government was going to do. And he's right. There has been a massive progressive systematic vandalism of a lot of the climate policies that were there before. And of course, the big one was the week before with the methane targets. What's been the sort of response in the climate communities, the climate diplomacy to that decision? Because we're one of the first. A lot of people were watching us on this.
Yeah, no, we are. We are the first country in the world to take this no additional warming approach to our methane targets. It's highly controversial. I know it was reported on in The Guardian, in Irish news. It's been notified to the European Union, and I think that there's actually a delegation today. I think the EU trade ambassador might be in New Zealand today.
Timing was bad. Yep.
The timing was bad, and my understanding is she's come out and said, New Zealand, we still care about how sustainable your exports are. And of course, we have a free trade agreement with the European Union that requires us to effectively implement the Paris Agreement, to not backslide on environmental and climate protections. I think it's just the government's really playing with fire. I think that they're making a series of decisions which are testing the boundaries, testing the limits for whether and what will cause the EU to actually enforce the trade agreement.
Jessica, may I ask Jessica that question, Bernard, or would you like to have got another?
No, you go.
You got a final? No.
No.
Jessica, I'm interested in thinking about Lawyers for Climate Change and what your organization's role is. I mean, I think we discussed last time. I have a young friend who's in that organization. What's the purpose of it, and what can you do? Because you're presumably trying to be apolitical. What's the purpose of Lawyers for the Climate? Lawyers for the Environment, rather.
Yeah, so we're Lawyers for Climate Action, not for climate change. We're trying to stop climate change.
Actually, no, those other guys are at the big end of town.
Yeah, that's the big end of town. And so we started 5 years ago, a small group of lawyers who saw this gap in New Zealand for the legal profession to rally together and try to be part of the solution. So it was a small, pretty high-powered group of lawyers who said, let's start an organisation, try to get as many lawyers as we can to be part of it. And where we've grown now, we've got a membership of about 400. We bring strategic climate litigation, so we actually hold government and big polluting companies to account. Our view is that having the right laws in place is really important, but if they're actually not enforced, that's a serious accountability gap. And then obviously also just trying to advocate for strong laws and pointing out and kind of being across the detail for when, climate related disclosures. This is a very technical piece of lawmaking, intersects with regulation, and making sure that advocacy around those laws is not actually just left to the big end of town, that you've still got lawyers kind of poring over the detail and engaging with ministers.
I must admit, I don't think there is a big end of town anymore, but if
you get up onto the 10th and 20th floors down the
very
bottom
old
of
Wellington idea. But Jessica, you what I understand. So, what about the big firms? Does Chapman Tripp and the others come behind this, or is this left to you as individual staff members, colleagues, or partners, or whatever roles you have in it? I mean, are the big firms taking part, or do they just get their money from the Todd family and Shell and BP and just...
Yeah, the big firms is tricky, and something we have to navigate as lawyers is conflicts. So, I mean, think of Smith and Fonterra. That's a huge climate litigation case against 7 of New Zealand's largest emitting companies. There's 7 large companies that are represented by many of the big firms. So I know we've got a number of people that support us, a number of members of ours that are part of big firms, but understandably can't get too involved for conflicts. We do have firms that act for us pro bono and on a seriously reduced fee basis. Groups like Gilbert Walker, Lee Salmon Long, for instance.
But so there won't be the lawyers from the big end of town. So the half dozen big firms, McVeigh, Chapman Tripp, whatever the other ones are called, I forget. they're not likely to support your things, or do New Zealand law? I just actually told Bernard just now that I wouldn't ask another question, but is there a requirement on New Zealand law firms to do a certain amount of pro bono work?
I think law firms can sign up and opt to do certain amounts of pro bono work. I don't know if there's a requirement. But as I said, so I know there's a number of, lawyers at senior, law firms. We've got law partners on our board and KC's
Great.
on our board.
Thank you.
We've got like serious hard-hitting lawyers involved. But look, it just gets a bit tricky for conflicts for the big firms to like formally come on board and support us. And so we don't ask that. But I mean, we've got a very wide membership, so lots of barristers because they're independent, but lots of members of firms.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for saying that. I did want to just explore. Bernard, you had a final question before we go to Robert.
Jessica, just one thing from me. This is about the vibe. you mix with a lot of people that in corporate law, in corporate New Zealand, people who are professionals. When they say something in public, they're careful about it, and they're trying to have an impact, or maybe they're trying not to have an impact. They're trying to keep their head below the parapet. What's the vibe out there at the moment at the big end of town when talking about climate in public? Because, a couple of years ago, people were proud to jump up and say, I'm trying to make a difference here. What about now?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's changing, and there's lots and lots of reasons for why that is the case. I mean, look, the people that tend to work with Lawyers for Climate Action and are interested in talking with us are generally the people that want to be jumping up and down and talking more about climate, but maybe feel they can't in the same way that they used to. And I mean, I think in some ways, Climate Change Response Act was passed and the Paris Agreement was signed. We introduced a climate-related disclosures regime and an ambitious methane target. And then those things start to bite as we make it through the 2020s, and people go, oh, it's actually quite hard to meet those targets. And it's actually, not as easy as we thought it might be in 2020. It means we have to do something, and then it all becomes a bit harder. And then Trump gets elected, and then, calls for New Zealand to pull out of Paris. And it does feel like there's quite a lot, swinging the wrong way.
And you see David Seymour doing that effectively. I mean, I suspect that there's a handbrake, somebody in the back seat driving, whatever the metaphor is.
Yeah.
Because David rather celebrates this every time it happens. Bernard, thank you. So,
well, I'll just say one final
Forgive me.
I'd like to end on a slightly more positive note, because
yes.
There's a fantastic lawyer in New Zealand who actually said the other week that it does feel like the pendulum is really swinging in one direction, but it will swing back. And in some ways, we just have to bide our time and try kind of keep the strong laws that we still have in place and try to keep those. But the pendulum will swing back. Climate change is happening. We're going to need robust adaptation laws, and we are going to need to mitigate emissions. And so I think that metaphor of the pendulum is a good one. And I think we're just kind of in the thick.
I just had an image of the guillotine come into my head about it, but of course
it's more gruesome than a pendulum,
and it's not a pendulum.
That way,
I know it's not
before
the pedants take over. It's not a pendulum. It's a slicing off. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Cheers.
It's really good to see you. Thanks very much. I'm glad you're doing this.
Bye.
Speaking of glad we're doing this now, Robert, WTF? I mean, we could say WTF, Robert, every time we do this session. What the fuck is going on? We've got Ukraine, Gaza. I mean, we talked last week, and I thought I was sticking my little hairy neck out to say that I thought the Gaza peace, the peace 2025 would last briefly, and I didn't think it would only be about 6 days. And now we've got a Ukraine fiasco. I mean, WTF, Robert? Professor
it's
Patman.
interesting, particularly interesting because the Europeans who are they're meeting, I think, on Friday, Northern Hemisphere time. They claim this is the guy who I think it's Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, who sort of used this term "daddy diplomacy." Apparently, the Europeans were, whether they've been influenced by Rutte or not, I don't know. He is head of NATO after all, and a former Dutch prime minister. But the Europeans apparently, according to Reuters, are crafting a proposal to try to get the Russians back to the negotiating table based on the Gaza peace plan, which sounds like Sounds like it's a recipe for disaster, but there you are.
But there must be though some of those people who turned up to the thing in Sharm el Sheikh. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's only a week ago that turned up at Sharm el Sheikh. Keir Starmer with his rather pathetic attempt to have a chat, Giorgio Meloni who couldn't get away from him fast enough, the leader of Indonesia who was desperate to talk to Eric Trump. I mean, there's no shame. A week later, we're in this position. So what do you... This must be a very interesting thing to discuss with your students about how diplomacy is conducted.
Or how not to conduct diplomacy. I mean, we keep saying it, but most liberal democracies have come out of the latter part of the Biden era and certainly the first part of the second Trump administration very badly. And Mark Carney may be showing how to deal with the Trump administration, but he's a very competent leader who has a sense of history and, if I may say so, an intellectual grasp of the issues, which is more than many of our leaders at the moment have. You simply do not win over Trump by fawning all over him, because he literally seems to be the prisoner of the last person he speaks to in terms of his thought process. And what is very interesting to me is watching the sort of very flattering editorials in the Washington Post, you probably picked up about this, where they're praising Trump for using the right mix of carrot and sticks with Vladimir Putin. Whereas
brilliant, genius.
So it's going to be an interesting meeting, that one in Europe, in London, I believe. 35 allies present who support Ukraine. I believe we will be represented, but not at the level of a foreign minister.
Interesting, because Winston Peters, of course, is in. He's going to be speaking at the Oxford Union, I think, this week, because I was trying to get hold of him to get his view on the coarsening of political discourse, which, of course, he's possibly part of. And he's speaking at the Oxford Union.
Why is he going there? That's a citadel of wokeism.
Well, exactly. No, but he's going to talk...
His supporters will be furious.
Yeah, sorry, we're intruding on the next guest, actually, Chris Finlayson, and you are welcome to stay, of course, for that. But
I'd love to.
I mean, I find this incredibly exhausting. I mean, what do you say to your? Are you giving full-on lectures in a big theatre?
Well, not at the moment, because it's during the exams and teaching has stopped. So, not having too much contact with students at the moment. But it is very difficult to classify Trump's diplomacy because it's incoherent. And he also contradicts himself frequently. And also, he doesn't seem to learn. For example, he had that, we've discussed it many times, but he had that disastrous first meeting with Zelensky where he accused, effectively, Ukraine of invading itself and causing a war. 9 months later, he's apparently came out with the same line again in another meeting with Zelensky. And
swept the papers off the...
Yes, and said he was sick of looking at the front line. But I think Zelensky managed it quite well and claimed that it was a very good meeting because the US had agreed to go through with selling Patriot anti-air missile battery systems.
Tomahawks? No, but not Tomahawks.
Not Tomahawks, no. Yeah. No, I think the boss told him that... Vladimir Putin told him that was unacceptable.
Robert, Jesus Christ, have you been having a gin and tonic this afternoon?
No.
That's quite a good line, though. And sorry, Bernard, you're busting, I can see.
Yeah. Robert, I wanted to know, the big change, I think, in the last day or so has been America imposing new sanctions on Russian oil exports, and the European Union imposing sanctions on LNG. Why do you think America has made this shift, and will it make a difference going for the hard, economic sanctions? Harder.
I'm not sure it's Mr. Trump, but I think Marco Rubio is fully aware that the war is the tide is turning in the war. Why is it turning? Because since early August, Ukraine has carried out about at least 16 major strikes on key parts of the energy infrastructure of Russia. This means, according to reports, somewhere between 35 and 38% of Russia's oil refining capacity has been effectively lost for the moment. And that has quite significant consequences. It means, for example, that the price of gasoline in Russia has gone up by 40%, which means there's a lot of disgruntled Russians. And on top of that, Denmark has taken an interesting step in the last week. They have, in retaliation to Russia sending drones to Denmark, the Danish government have started boarding Russian shadow fleet ships and getting them on technicalities, because many of these ships, Russia has we should explain for our listeners
a huge
and viewers,
fleet of shadow ships.
A fleet of about 1,000 ships. Most of them are 20 years or more in age. They cannot get insurance because they're not seaworthy, and that's part of the attraction, because many insurance companies will not provide that insurance for Russian vessels given some of the sanctions that have been imposed. Now, what's happening, this is quite significant. The Danish don't seem to be mucking around here. There's Øresund is the port there. It's the only exit out of the Baltic. So the Russian shadow fleet has to go through that area. And the Danish have started boarding these ships. Now, what does that mean? It means, once again, that Russian shadow fleet ships laden with oil are being detained, which again is reducing their exports of oil. Exports are down 30% because of the Ukrainian targeting in the last 2 months. But this from Denmark will push that figure further up. I think the Americans believe that this is a good time to apply sanctions. There still is a huge difficulty, though, because even if this strategy works, at least from the American point of view, of getting the Russians to the negotiating table, I mean, what is the difficulty at the moment? Why did Mr. Trump cancel that meeting in Budapest with Putin? Because Putin wouldn't agree to a ceasefire. And, of course, Putin can't really agree to a ceasefire because if they're going to have a ceasefire, that would open up the whole question of whether Putin can keep the territories.
Correct. Yeah.
He has illegally gained. And of course, Zelensky's playing quite a clever game here. He keeps praising Trump, saying, "Oh yes, all we want is immediate ceasefire. We agree with the president," and he knows that Putin can't accept that.
Yeah.
And that is actually, in a sense, disarming to some degree Trump's utter animosity towards Zelensky.
Yeah, because it also, Robert, it was very interesting to see Zelensky say, yeah, absolutely, we can have a ceasefire on the current front lines.
On the current front lines, but also adding that Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be preserved. So what's in it for Vladimir?
You can have a ceasefire on that, and then have the conversations, which he can't give up the territory, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, there will be a split here between the Europeans and the Americans, because the Americans seem to, I mean, this is why apparently Trump was so enthusiastic about his last telephone call with Putin. Putin said that he will give up some of his claims, but he wants the whole of Donetsk, which they've been desperately trying to capture by military means for 4 years, but have failed to do so. And there's no way that Zelensky is going to allow him to have the most strategic prize.
Maybe diplomacy is war by other means, whereas not. And I think it's Clausewitz who said, war is diplomacy by other means, or is it?
I think it's Clausewitz who said,
Jesus Christ, you're the professor, Robert. You're supposed to be the one who knows the quotes.
Well, Clausewitz said, amongst other things, war is politics by other means, and Clausewitz argued that you must have a political objective to pursue a war, and if you lose sight of that, you're in trouble.
So just let me ask you a final question, because we have Chris Finlayson parked against your bumper. China, it's done the rare earth things again. We thought we had a deal with Besant. Isn't China just playing Trump like a little trout at the moment?
Well, I think there's two troubling aspects about this. Not only is China showing itself to be quite adept at playing Trump and not giving ground, with people like Scott Bessent, now the the Treasury Secretary, saying we can't decouple from China, and that's it, full stop. But the second thing is that Trump seems to be almost hell bent on boosting China.
Yes.
And that's the extraordinary thing about it. Mr. Trump is desperate, as he puts it, to contain China and win the race for global dominance. But the problem is, his idea of going about that task seems to be boosting China at every turn. And
I think I saw
snuggling up to Putin is just, from the Chinese point of view, is weakness and confused weakness at that. So he's not winning much respect in Beijing, unfortunately.
Speaking of respect, let's bring in
Chris Finley.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's always
Thank
lovely.
you.
But by all means, stay on in the background there and interject if you like. I mean,
no,
Simon
I won't
hates
do
it when
I'll
I
just
do
listen.
that. But Chris, I'm Peter Bale. We haven't met yet. You know Bernard, I think. Now, I've been dying to have you on for months because I'm intrigued by your history as the treaty negotiations minister. And I thought I read something from you when we tried to get you on last time that you said publicly, I'm not going to say anything more for a very long time. And here you are with us finally. You did an excellent piece with Audrey Young in the Herald this week. What's going on? Why are you poking your head up above the parapet? And good on you for doing it, please.
Well, I always enjoy working with Audrey, whom I regard as the best bush lawyer in New Zealand. In fact, I saw Mark Cooper, the former president of the Court of Appeal, who's married to Audrey's sister, and I said, I've just been talking to the best lawyer in the Young family, not you, Audrey.
But why are you poking your head above the parapet at the moment?
Well, normally I think I take the view that former politicians should probably shut up, but I'm very invested in the treaty negotiations project and particularly interested in the Marine and Coastal Act. I invested a lot of time in that particular task when I was, and I emphasized when I was Attorney General, not Minister for Treaty Negotiations, because this wasn't a treaty negotiations matter. It was a matter concerning access to justice, the rule of law, and property rights. So I was dealing with it as Attorney General. And I feel that the current government, including the party of which I have been a long-time member since 1975, got it totally wrong. And some of the careerists
You mean in this new act that has gone through its third reading?
Yes,
it totally
they've got
wrong.
it completely
Would you
wrong.
elaborate on that? Because Bernard's dying to ask you that same question, but just elaborate why this act is so wrong.
Yeah, well, in order to answer that, just a little bit of background.
Of course, please.
It was a very tightly negotiated arrangement between the Maori Party and the National Party in 2010. So what we did was provide a statutory recognition of customary title. After the Court of Appeal judgment came out, it was not really certain whether customary title was a use right or more akin to a fee simple title. And so we defined what it was. It's very constrained. It can't be sold. Public access is guaranteed. And sections 64 and 65 of MACA set out provisions relating to accommodated arrangements like wharves, other pieces of infrastructure. Now, because we're not dealing with treaty breaches, we're dealing with property rights, the test was reasonably tough. You had to hold in accordance with tikanga and exclusive use and occupation since 1840 without substantial interruption. What they've done is taken that test and tightened it up considerably and added in various matters. And the second thing they've done, which I find particularly offensive, is they've altered the burden of proof. If I sue you and you say, well, actually, I've got a defence under the Limitation Act, that's what you'd call an affirmative defence. And while the overall burden of proof is on me as the plaintiff, you have the burden of showing in relation to the affirmative defence that I'm time barred. And the burden of proof on extinguishment lay on the Crown, and they've reversed it. So iwi have to satisfy the strict criteria under Section 58, and moreover, have to prove a negative.
We
And I
don't
think
use
that
the
that's
word
very
moreover on this podcast unless we're absolutely desperate. But good on you for doing it. Hereunto and moreover. But sorry, Bernard, go ahead.
Yes, Chris, I was curious about what you think's going on behind the scenes here, because the solution, which you've explained there, was an elegant way to solve a political issue, which Helen Clark actually on this podcast a few months ago said, if only I'd been advised that I could have done this, I would have done this. So why?
I mean, you solved a problem that Helen Clark left you in a way, didn't you? Sorry to chip on
not
that,
really.
Bernard. But
I mean, time's a great healer, and I look back and think that she was faced with a particularly difficult situation. And so she responded accordingly. Michael Cullen actually gave me some very good advice, and that formed the framework of this. Looking back now, I greatly respect Cullen as a person and as Attorney General. I snorted when he was made Attorney General. He was fantastic. He did a very good job. And so, I don't cast the blame. The Labour Party in 2010, I thought, conducted themselves in an exemplary fashion. David Parker was principled. They actually opposed the legislation because they thought you should leave it to the courts to develop a test, whereas I wasn't very happy about that. But so I don't bear any partisan rancor. I think at times maybe she hadn't been properly advised on the way through, but even though it wasn't a bipartisan approach in 2010, it was a National Party, Maori Party approach with a very principled Labour and Greens opposition on particular grounds. I thought it was Parliament at its best. But what we've seen in recent times is the usual rushed legislation, and it's a very odd situation. I'm aware of numerous cases where governments have legislated because they've lost in court, but these guys have legislated because they've won in court, and it's weird.
So
And
what's changed here, Chris? Because your party has a long history of being quite thoughtful, conservative, and also trying to bring people together. That was one of the great lines from Jim Bolger, actually, that he saw part of his role to bring people together. Whereas this current national-led government and its partners, ACT and New Zealand First, don't seem to have that same vibe. What's going on?
Well, maybe we're not all that different from the rest of the world. I say to my American buddies that if I was around in the United States, I'd be a northeastern liberal Republican, and in the United Kingdom, they'd be called One Nation Conservatives. Jack Marshall, in his maiden speech, talked about liberal conservatism, and because I joined the National Party because of Jack Marshall and Hugh Templeton. I'm a liberal conservative. But what we're seeing the world over is that liberal conservatism's getting squeezed and is generally being replaced by populist conservatism. And I think that the reality of the matter is populist conservatism leads to ashes. I loathe the Reform Party in the United Kingdom, for example. I think that they were the ones behind who forced Cameron to make that foolish error about the Brexit referendum. And everyone who goes to England these days says how depressed it is. It's lost its lustre. It was a cataclysm that will haunt the UK for at least half a century.
Chris, it's a day of reflection. You've come back from the funeral of Jim Bolger, and you wrote a really, I thought, thoughtful and generous, but also quite informed obituary of Jim Bolger in the New Zealand Herald this week, which I will link to in the show notes. Could you tell us a bit more about, how you got to know Jim and what you thought?
Well, I particularly got to know him when I was Minister for Treaty of Waitangi negotiations. He helped me with Ngāpuhi and short of sending the Secretary General of the United Nations in there to try and get them to
it always works.
settlement.
Yeah.
Or maybe Trump. Bolger was the best option. And then he worked with me on the Tūhoe negotiation, then went on the board of Te Urewera, helped me with Parihaka. He really was a very special guy. It's not only the economics and the treaty negotiations, he is the one who saved Papa in the first term of the national government, but I think Ruth wanted to let it go, and he said, no, it's important. So he was a very interesting guy and a very um, decent human being, and he was dispatched today, sent to God with love and care, as I always remark after I've been to a Requiem Mass. Rome treats people very harshly during their lives, but Rome's at its best at the time of death.
Yeah, which we know from so many. I was just, for some reason, I've just suddenly thought about Brideshead Revisited. Exactly.
Lord Mark Twain got trapped in the end.
Yeah, Chris, if I may call you Chris, just going back for one moment to the foreshore and seabed and this act last night. Could you disabuse the audience really of two aspects? One is, if Maori get customary title, it's going to prevent development of the foreshore, and we can't go swimming there, and we can't go to our traditional beaches, and we can't get mollusks from the Wairarapa. And a second question, which you may want to answer first, is people you and I both know, I've seen, particularly in the area of the Hobson's Pledge people, I'm sorry, I always call it Hobson's Choice, say, why is Chris Finlayson being called up here by RNZ or everybody else? Because he's working for iwi, he's conflicted. And I found that rather extraordinary, because it seems to me that you are a very relevant person given your history as a politician. But just could you address those two questions, please? Because they do come up from time to time in the darker realms of the internet.
Well, I act for everyone, and I operate according to the cab rank rule. And if it's within my area of expertise, I'm not conflicted, and most importantly, if I can be paid, then I'm very happy with that. And so that's the way it is. And it's not an option, it's a duty. So that deals with why am I acting. The second thing is that when I left Parliament, I didn't die to this stuff. It means a lot to me. I carry on in the finest traditions of the National Party, in my view, with Ralph Hannon, Duncan McIntyre, Jim Bolger.
Jesus, you're
Doug
making
Graham.
me feel very, very old.
Well, I mean, the National Party understood the stuff, and it meant a lot to these people. Jim Bolger used to spend most Sunday nights, as I understand it, having a chat to Graham Latimer about this and that. And so there were those links. The links between the National Party and Rangatira go back to the formation of the party. And these people, the trouble is that these people who currently are the stewards of the National Party don't understand its history or its traditions. Many of them are careerists. More than a few of them needed a waiver from the National Party so that they could stand for candidacies. And come the storm, they'll weigh anchor and move off because they're careerists. And I'm sorry, but I don't have any respect for them. In fact, I'm not sorry. I withdraw that.
Yeah. Chris, one of the things that's come up a lot, and that I have mentioned to people, I've written a story about, which I hope is going to go out fairly shortly, is the use of terms like activist judges. I mean, people are throwing things at you, which is one thing. You're a KC and a barrister and a former politician. What do you make of this use of the term activist judges? The idea that one politician has even talked about bringing in foreign judges because our judges are too woke. I mean, this seems to be a very dangerous stage to me. Can I just put my opinion in there and then introduce you to repeat it? Sorry about that.
Well, when I was attorney, I actually did speak to some English judges and say, well, come out to New Zealand from time to time, and they would have loved it. But the judiciary didn't like that. Personally, I think if there's an important case involving a Trans-Tasman issue, and we're dealing with the Commerce Act, which has its equivalent in Australia. In principle, I've got no reason why a couple of High Court judges from Australia couldn't come over and sit on it. I actually think it would be quite good. So I'm in principle, I'm not opposed to any of that sort of stuff. However, I do think that some judges have got things wrong, and the Supreme Court is infallible. What's the old joke? It's infallible because it's final. It's not final because it's infallible. And I think decisions have been from time to time, shall we say, the subject of a lot of commentary. Ellis is a good example. So measured
Do you mean
criticism.
okay? Just one second. Sorry, Chris. I know you're not used to being, but do you mean in the Ellis case the introduction of tikanga and his mana? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I don't think it needed to be decided on tikanga grounds. In fact, I had another view, and that is that the Mackay Committee on Defamation had looked at that issue and recommended that in certain circumstances the legal representatives of the deceased should be able to get a declaration that the deceased has been defamed. Parliament didn't proceed with it.
Good.
I would have thought the sorts of things that they dealt with in Ellis really should have been the subject of consideration by the Parliament.
But do we have a sufficient process then? Okay, because so if the Supreme Court gets something wrong, the appeals court gets something wrong, don't we have those checks and balances now through the system? I mean, why are
Yes,
we
we
going
do.
through and
And-
reviewing these laws now? Because Parliament is saying, or the coalition is saying, this was not the intent. But you were the bloke who put the intent in there, and you say it's against the intent of the original law.
Oh, it's completely against the intent, and that's why I said to them in the article Audrey published, look, just come out and say it. You're redoing the test. You're not clarifying anything. The Supreme Court actually clarified the matter when they had this horrible, grubby little coalition arrangement in relation to this legislation. The law that was extant was the Court of Appeal decision, which was a majority decision of the Court of Appeal, which frankly got it wrong. But the Supreme Court got it right, in my view. So why legislate when it's been clarified?
Are you
Chris,
worried about this? Just one. I have a final question, or you can have a final question, because burden up. Are you worried about the safety of judges in New Zealand, given the rhetoric around the judiciary?
I worry generally about that issue because while I think most people who snipe like that and snipe about me are keyboard warriors, yeah, the security of our judges is something that we should never, or the security of public officials is something we should never take for granted. I mean, Matt Ducey had a rock through his windscreen the other day. I recall when I went over to the Court of Appeal to appear at the final sitting of one particularly fine Court of Appeal judge, there were some vexatious litigants standing outside yelling and screaming about him. So one should never take this sort of stuff for granted.
Thank you so
Chris-
much for doing that.
Chris, it's wonderful to have you on. Thank you so much. We really
Thanks, Chris.
appreciated it.
Next time I'm going to ask you about that picture behind you, because I think that looks like Malta.
It is. It's HMS Warspite. It's a magnificent battleship that refused to die because she went on the rocks when she was being towed to be scrapped. And so, I've always liked Warspite. I like the
Did you
hood,
have a
the
relative
hood.
on it?
No, but it's just I was wandering around London when I was at the Privy Council once and saw that
Wow.
and went in and said, that's the Repulse.
Brilliant.
And he said, no, it's the Warspite. And so I decided to buy it.
Excellent. Oh, I think we're very good on metaphors and so on here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Sarah, sorry to keep you waiting.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Bernard. Forgive me.
Thank you, Chris.
Good night.
And thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on and for staying on. I appreciate it on a huge day for yourself. Sarah Dalton, the Executive Director of the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists. Today has been the mega strike day. Can you tell us how it went from your point of view?
Yeah, I'm really happy to do that. But I just have to say, the battleship that refused to die, I quite like that. It's a nice...
Absolute. No. Completely. I mean,
And
we are so big on metaphors here.
Yeah. Also, I live very near to Warspite Ave in Porirua. Like that's a major street, near where I live.
And
so
what is your T-shirt? Speaking of not your T-shirt, your blouse or shirt. What's the
it's a
1840?
T-shirt. 1840 Te Tiriti o Waitangi, right?
Yeah, good.
What happened then?
No, yeah.
Yeah. Everything
it's-
and nothing.
Yeah.
Jesus, you're good at this.
Sorry, Sarah.
You can come again.
Sorry, Sarah. Today's news. How did it go from your point of view? This mega strike has really captured the imagination of the public. 65% of whom support the various strikers today. So how did it go?
It was amazing, but I've got massive FOMO because, of course, our events in Wellington and Christchurch and a number of other parts of the country got stormed out because of the red weather warning. So I'm here in Wellington. I had to stay in Wellington because I actually spent some of today at the Employment Relations Authority for the hearing for Health New Zealand's application for fixing as an alternative to continuing to bargain with us for our collective agreement. But I was just talking to one of the organisers up in Auckland who said, my God, your crew are small, but they are awesome. And so clearly senior doctors and dentists did not make up the majority of that enormous mass of people that we've been seeing in the media who looks like they had the time of their lives. But it was reported to me that one of those doctors said, I'm a paediatrician. Usually I save lives one at a time, but today it feels like I'm saving multiple lives at a time because we're standing here together for, better access to and equitable access to core public services. And I really think that's what sits at the heart of today, which is educators and health workers and support workers and public servants generally, and the public who care about the work that they do, saying, hey, we're here, listen to us, we've got to invest in these things. And part of investing in those things is investing in the people, because that is generally...
Does that mean, Sarah, that Judith Collins and even Simeon were right, that there's a political dimension to this and that you did feel a collective sense of need to make that statement?
Well, I've given other interviews where, like, health is entirely political, right? It's all about, and because public services are political, they're not party political, but they're about, at least one of you's an economist, maybe, it's
No,
about
I just do the jokes.
how we choose to, spend our resources, right? Who gets it, who misses out, how we make those choices. And the choices that this government has made, to be fair, we haven't been very happy with any of the governments we've had in recent years in terms of their failure to invest in doctors, senior doctors and dentists. But this government in particular is massively disinvesting in public services and at a direct cost, both to the people who work in them and the people who actually need to be supported by them.
Sarah, what did you think of the interventions by Brian Roche and Ian Rennie in the last couple of weeks to really, jump in there and say, New Zealand can't afford this. We've got to get the size of government down to 30% of GDP, and we can't have debt higher than 30% of GDP. And, we've just got to offer 1%. That's as much as we can possibly do. And all of these doctors and teachers and nurses should just suck it up and get on with it, because that's the fact of life.
I heard him on the radio saying that he was politically neutral and doing his job as he should, on top of all of that, dare I say, bunkum. He clearly hasn't had the opportunity to read Ganesh Ahiral's new paper that he wrote for us, which is poetically titled The Fiscal Rules, and I guess how to understand them. So I would really recommend that. We've just released a whole swathe of new publications following on from the Lorgelli Tim Bensel paper that I think you guys have already talked about. There's a great one from Gabrielle Baker looking at Te Tiriti o Waitangi health policy and outsourcing. And there's Marilyn Waring's paper about economics and health for all. And there's Ganesh's paper about the fiscal rules. And then Andrea Black's paper on managed decline. So, what's really driving us is partly core terms and conditions for our members, right, who work in the public hospitals. But it's also this deeper analysis of what is driving decision-making and investment or disinvestment in core public services, including hospitals and our health system. And we need a paradigm shift, right? We need another way of talking about this stuff and another way of measuring progress. But I think, the poverty of the engagement, the level, the failure of analysis was perhaps exemplified when, good on him, the minister came and talked to our conference last week, when he was asked a question by a physician about, hey, minister, how about paying some attention to people with complex medical needs? He got an answer which was focused on surgical outsourcing. That doesn't even understand the question, right? Let alone the decisions being made about targets and so forth.
Sarah, apart from wanting to send Bella Freud your T-shirt because she's very good at those number outfits that she does in the UK, we've had Gary Payenda on the show a few times. I'm sure you know him. We've had a friend of mine, David Geller, who I'm absolutely sure you know. They talk about not just creeping, but quite rapid privatisation of health in New Zealand. The government is doing quite a clever job, it seems to me, at saying, well, we're just getting operations done. But are you concerned about creeping privatisation here?
Yeah, wildly concerned. It's more expensive. It adds to inequities, as Gabby Baker's paper demonstrates. It means that we're kind of paying twice. We're paying for our public health system, and then we're paying for our public health system to outsource at a higher rate. It's not efficient, and of course it adds to the postcode lottery and all of the other barriers to care that poor people, Māori people, Pacific people, rural people already face. So it's not really an answer. It's an answer to a different question, right? But it's certainly not one about how we better support our public health system and how we talk sensibly about access to care.
Thank you so much. Bernard's over.
I'm curious, Sarah, about what happens when you say 1% means a real pay cut for our workers and they're leaving for Australia. Do you want our health system to be gutted? How can they possibly respond? What's their answer?
We haven't had what I would call a comprehensive answer. I started this particular job at ACMS in 2020. We have been asking that question since then. We took a CPI adjustment and a 12-month rollover when our 2020 bargaining got interrupted by the level 4 lockdown. And that at that time, CPI was 1.7%. So that's what we took to buy some time to deal with the crisis. But every year since then, we've been trying to have a conversation, which is, how many senior doctors and dentists do you think we need? How many have we got? Where are the gaps? What are your priorities for filling those gaps? What do you think a senior doctor and dentist working in the public sector should earn? What do you think about the loss of relativities with resident doctors, some of whom now earn more than the specialists who are supposed to supervise them? Talk to us about these things. And every year, a different senior people leader from Health New Zealand will turn up and say, look, we just need some time to get our house in order. We're not quite across our payroll. We're not quite across our workforce data. We just need some time. And when we've taken that time, we'll come back to you with an answer. And they say that every single year. And because it's a different person, they genuinely mean it, right? But nothing meaningful has happened. And so we are endlessly doing our own research, trying to gather our own statistics and data and going back and saying, well, what are you going to do about the 40% vacancies at Tairāwhiti? What are you going to do about the 12 to 14% average vacancies across the country? What are you going to do about the fact that we can no longer, deliver,
babies,
gynae oncology, services, even regionally, the different services are collapsing all around the place. So, and all of these things, our collective agreement is only an indirect lever on these things, but I guess it's an actual and symbolic reminder of the value we place on the work that our public hospital doctors and dentists do. And unfortunately, the message we've had for about the last 5 years is we don't really value them. We're happy to say we do, but we don't want to invest. We don't want to give any signals. We don't want to commit. At the same time, and I'm sure I said this last time I was on your show, hundreds of millions of dollars on locums a real reluctance. So push the money out now. And that sits with the outsourcing too, right? Whatever it costs, let's just get some numbers up. Let's get some statistics that look like we're making progress.
Short-term targets.
But, today, this isn't people, but, Nelson Hospital, big power outage, and their backup power supply failed.
Oh.
And they were at nearly an hour with no power
She'll be
at all.
right, Sarah.
Yeah. No, it's awful.
That's huge. And the minister has ordered an inquiry, so that'll be interesting. I guess the answer will be we have not invested properly in building or maintaining our core hospital facilities. And that's where David Clark's NAMP paper, which is not the funnest read in the world, but, National Asset Management Plan for Hospitals comes into focus, where you look at gas, power, water, air conditioning. You had the failure of hot water in Auckland Hospital just a few months ago. That was a known issue that they hadn't got on top of in time because they're busy tightening the screws on their costs. They have been tasked, Health New Zealand have been tasked by this government to move from a $1 billion deficit to a $200 million deficit to a break-even budget in the next couple of years. Now, the government accounts showed that there's a $500 million underspend on predicted personnel costs this year,
which is an excellent way to do that, to meet that target. So and it's becoming harder and harder to get permission to fill vacancies, to recruit, to job size, to needed levels. So this is mass scale disinvestment, which I guess if we circle back round helps to answer the question of why so many people turned out today in Auckland and in other places, to even that lone protester who very carefully made her way from Wainui to Parliament today and registered her protest. She's a teacher, I think. No, it's because there was only one protester in Wellington. They just didn't bother the others.
No.
It was a wild old day.
It was, wasn't it? So, Sarah, we have to unfortunately finish now. But what I'd like to do is give you a gift and our audience a gift, given that you weren't able to go to the protests. There were over 100,000 people at the places where they were allowed to protest. And I have some pictures of some of the great signs that were at the march today. And I just wanted to show you. And a few of them, we've seen smarter cabinets at IKEA. I quite like that one. If we did our jobs as badly as Simeon, we'd be sacked by now. That's quite good. Teacher burnout is why we have this turnout. I'm loving these personal signs. Don't make me use my outside voice. I suspect that's a teacher.
That is a teacher.
Certainly an introvert. Yeah.
Yeah. Senior nurses are almost extinct, says the dinosaur. That's quite good. I quite like that. This is the common sense of deals, which is quite fun.
Yeah.
There's the teacher voice thing. This is a bit of a theme, and I love it. I'm here for the costumes and the funny.
Can I also point out, Bernard, that yet again you're doing visuals on something that is normally put out as a podcast? I mean, I know we've got the little special Bernard audience of 182 people, but you're translating podcasts into a video.
We're all going video. Simon will edit it out. And then just finally, things are so bad, even the freelancers are here. I just wanted to put that up there. Thank you very much, Sarah Dalton, for
Thanks, Sarah.
coming in
And next
today.
time we'll have to ask you about your brooch, which I suspect has got a Baroness Hale spider brooch.
It was my
thing.
grandma's.
Excellent.
Grandma's.
Well, your grandma had fantastic taste, and so do you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Cheers.
So, Bernard, shall I just swiftly do the skateboarding dog?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Which is Michael Wolf, as you know, is a mate of mine. I saw him the other day or a couple of weeks ago, and he is reverse suing Melania Trump overnight because she has. And he and I talked about this because her lawyers have been picking off the Daily Beast and a number of other places that have published or quoted Michael. And what they're quoting him on are things that Michael has said, which are out there in the ether around Trump and Melania having first slept together on Epstein's aircraft, about some of the issues around Melania's arrival in the United States and who she was going out with. Is it possible that but Michael has raised these issues. So Melania has sued him for $1 billion. So he has countersued her in New York. and has asked for full-on court disclosure statements from Trump and from Melania. So Michael is going full. Michael is absolutely going full Monty on this. And just let me. There's a lovely line in the, because I often finish with a line on these things, as you know, at the very end of the. Because what Melania has said is, no, I'm not going to comment on this because I said everything in my book, Melania. And she said she had met Trump at New York's Kit Kat Club during the 1998 Fashion Week after being, quotes, drawn to his magnetic energy.
Yes.
Which reminded me of the famous quote from Mrs. What's her name? Mrs. Merton, which is not a show I ever liked, which is, what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels? Anyway, it's all a bit ghastly, but if I think I've mentioned before, Michael is doing the most astounding things on Instagram at Michael Wolf NYC. It's great fun. And remember, he's a good journalist and doing his best, but he's going to try and take them down.
He's unleashing the discovery dogs, and Oscar Wilde could have given some great advice to Melania Trump. Be prepared if you're going to start going to court for all sorts of drama. Thank you very much, Peter. I'm Bernard Hickey, and Simon's going to be having a lot of editing work to do. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back in next week. Ka kite anō. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And poor old Simon's going to try and edit the bloody sound stuff of the pictures into something sensible.
Don't worry.
See you.
Sorry.